Excellent. Hi. Well, please, I realize that the nature of this event is a little challenging for you all to ask me questions, but I do look forward to that. Hopefully we're able to get through some of those pieces as we go. I'd love to thank Cardo and the rest of the sponsors for inviting me to speak here. I do come at this from a little bit of a different perspective than I believe a lot of other participants. But in the same token, I hope that we're able to get you some interesting information and provide you with some understanding of how Jefferies does this, which we believe is a little bit differentiated than some of the other people in the space. I'll get right into it, giving some information around my background as well as my team's structure, how we work, and then some examples of some actual use cases that we've gone into. So, great. I work within equity research, which I assume many of the people on the call understand and be familiar with, but at the same token, I'll give some context to. So we work within our global research department covering a few thousand stocks for a few hundred professionals. Our function is to assist them in understanding the availability and application of data. We are not a central function for the entirety of the firm. We sit within research, and that's by design, so that we're able to very directly interact with the teams and understand their thesis and how they're working on a problem. My team is full stack data scientists. I do have one ETL specialist. The rest of the team is very lean, and we do focus on working with our vendors and partners like Cardo to push a lot of the sourcing of the data and then the interpretation and presentation around it into those systems so that our clients are able to replicate what we do. My background was a risk analyst at a number of multi-manager hedge funds, and I came into this function with the design of trying to create a very similar function to how we observed our clients doing it. So we went out and saw that many of our clients were building out a lean, much more tactical function within their organizations, and so we wanted to do that too, so that we could face our clients and interact with them similarly to how they were solving a problem. Our goal is to be able to go to a data vendor, say this is a source, generally someone you pay, sometimes it's another source, whatever. We'll work with that data to process it, translate it, interpret it, and then we'll go with our researcher, our analysts, or on the buy side, the equivalent of portfolio manager, and we'll actually sit with them to work through the problem they're trying to solve. So rather than give me a question, give me some data, and we'll give an answer, we work with them on what key question you're trying to solve, how that can be answered potentially with data, and how you can present it, normalize it, help clients understand it, and convert that into engagement, interaction, and answers to questions for our clients. Further than that, it's also the question of how a client's going to want to do that. So I'll get into some of that with some of the examples we've gone through so far. I just went through a little bit of this, but I want to give a little more detail. Our workflow is in some ways different than some of our other firms we've spoken to, or how some other pure data functions are structured. We really sit with what is the key debate. So I'll sit with a fundamental team and ask them the question, what do you wish you knew? And they'll nearly always start back to me with, we're not consumer teams, there's no data for me. Or we already know all the vendors in our space, or we already have these pieces. And we'll say, no, I'm not asking you about data. I want to know, what is your key question? What is the key debate? What do you wish you had an answer to? Because while I might not have a data set that is reported to answer that question, we might be able to find something that is next to it, that is related to it, that can augment it, or that can be used to answer a very similar question that will give our teams and therefore our clients much better understanding around the key debates and key questions they have. From this key debate, we work on sourcing data, finding a new vendor, finding an auxiliary set, finding exhaust, potentially sourcing something from a publicly available source. Then we also work on the visualization and presentation, which is a lot of what we do with Cardo. We are not doing, call it super advanced analytics in a lot of the pieces we're working on, primarily because our research teams and then our clients that are asking us these questions are not necessarily looking for that kind of analysis. They want something they understand, but that we're using a larger volume of information. We're going beyond what they could do comfortably before, and we're giving them something that makes sense, but is also something they could not have done otherwise, right? Don't get me wrong, we like to push the envelope. We like to go into models that are new or differentiated, but oftentimes that first step of just combining three things that logically made sense and presenting them in a way that helps someone answer it is a huge driver. And we found a lot of success with that with our clients because they come back to us and say, I understand what you did there. Tell me more about the next thing. I want to expand that. because similar to our conversations with them, they're generally, usually the person I'm facing, is having that same conversation internally. So I'm helping them articulate how to elevate and expand what they're working on to the next step and next step. I'd like to go through a couple of examples, right? I'll try not to go too quickly through these, but I know we only have a limited amount of time. But if there are any questions or follow-ups, I'm pretty easy to find. My email's here, phone number. There's not a lot of people named Rayne working in finance. And I'm pretty sure I'm the only one at Jefferies in data. Actually, correction, I know there's at least one other person named Rayne at Jefferies, but I am definitely the only one at the data team. So please don't hesitate if you have any questions, follow up, want to just discuss these, reach out to us. We're here to help with this. Okay, so I want to go into one specific case. I have a very common scenario. Company A is acquiring company B. How can we thoughtfully quantify synergies captured between store closures with this merger? So, like I said, very straightforward kind of question. Company A is buying company B. When they do, how many of these stores are going to close? How much benefit are we going to get from that? Are we going to be able to reduce costs, but at the same time retain income, et cetera, et cetera? So when this conversation started, our research team came to us and was like, this is a relatively known thing. We're not going to want to change a lot about our analysis, but maybe you can help us build a pretty map. Totally reasonable request, something that we're willing to help with. But at the same time, we thought, actually, there's probably more to this that we can assist with. So data sourcing. I need to know where these stores are. To many people on this call, that might seem like an obvious question. But if you didn't start off knowing where to find those stores, you need to work with a vendor. So we use a couple of different vendors. In this particular case, I believe we work with ThinkNum. But then we also wanted to put them together. But what we started to realize is we didn't just want to ask a question about where stores physically lie. We believe that the behavior of those stores are going to be different based on what kind of location it's in. Is it urban versus rural? What's the demographic profile of their customers? How's that working? So in this particular case, we were looking at Amrak, and CTAS, which are both companies that work a lot with uniforms. And we were looking at how do they overlap. By partnering with our research team, we were able to understand some of the peculiarities of these companies. So had we just, in a bubble, looked at it and said, oh, well, I'm just going to look at physical differences, that's it. But by talking with the research team, we knew that the behavior around how customers interact with these companies is different in an urban versus rural environment. We also found plenty of edge cases, as we cited here, where there's not just 2 stores close to each other, but 3. Which one would close? How do we treat them? And so instead of just building a model on our side, we sat with the team and said, how would you use this? How would you interpret this? And how would you use this to change your understanding of the company? That last piece really mattered, because instead of this ending up as here's a map, here's just a presentation, we actually worked with the team to change the way that they were building their pro forma merger model. So they started to use this piece into how they were valuing the final combined company, and use this as a key aspect of how they wrote their note around it, how they structured it, and then how we interacted with clients around this. So this is a big key aspect about how we think about it, because we're not just trying to answer, here is a data question. We're trying to answer you, the professional researcher, have a fundamental question. We may be able to answer that utilizing the data we have and the tools we have. And I say tools for this particular case is a big part of it. I'll go back one. If I just looked at visual representation of this, or I plotted these on a map using another service, or I did something else with it, I would have to stop there. But because we used a tool that allowed us to push the envelope of our understanding with Cardo, we were able to be more thoughtful about how we combined data sets, how we looked at the overlaps, and how we connected them to each other, instead of simply saying count by zip code or count by state or something else that I could have done in a more straight line programming environment. I'll move on to another. This is also a relatively known kind of concept, white space expansion. I have a major retailer. They are in a lot of the country, but where are they going to go next? How are they going to expand? It's something that many people have methodologies for, and we didn't so much come up with a new one, but we sat with the research team and said, well, how would you want to frame this? What is your questions around it? And work with them to try to come up with another way of interpreting this kind of information. What we specifically looked at was the expansion of Dollar General, right? The management has claimed that they're going to expand dramatically. They're opening lots of new locations. They're going to make tons of money in each location. The demographic profile should be considered similar, et cetera, et cetera. And they've said they will not cannibalize existing stores. Okay, great. We were able to look at store locations, like I've mentioned before, but then we combine that with other data. So one of the other sponsors of the event, SafeGraph, with them, we were able to look at not just traffic to this store, but traffic to other brands. So what we started to look at was when a customer shops at brand A, Dollar General, do they also shop at brand B, Family Dollar, Dollar Tree, Walmart, those kinds of businesses? And how does that change over time? Because we are able to look at this information all the way down to the individual store with history, we actually were able to build out a framework to better understand that as a Dollar General opens, the change in behavior of customers that had previously shopped at the other brands shifted. So we weren't just looking at it and saying, oh, well, I can't open one close to a competitor, because from our analysis, we believe that we are able to actually find examples of when they open close to a competitor, they eat their competitor. So as a result, not 100%, I'm not trying to make a definitive call on the behavior of the company, but more as they were moving into these markets, we were able to see that the change in behavior was notable, understandable, and something that, yeah, we had to build some models for it. So as is a common data science problem, our biggest issue was in finding ways to make it so that people understood the output and could utilize it, thus visualization. So we worked with Cardo and we looked at it and said, okay, we know distance. We know how much customers are traveling. We know different store locations. And we can then start to identify where could they put new stores to hit the same kind of demographic profile by looking at census data, to hit the same kind of interaction with their competitors. How can we find this? And then how much space they actually have. Because again, the key thesis of all of this wasn't they will definitively open these stores, we believe, and no one said this before. It's management said this. So if that's true, we know what management's expectation is for growth. My research team had expectation for growth. Put those two together. We just wanted to give a confidence around how likely is it that they are actually going to open the stores they said they did. And if they did, will it have the effect we think it could? Our team was able to put out a pretty thoughtful note around this. I want to believe this ended up being 40 pages or so. We did waterfall analysis. We looked at various places. And this key answer ended up becoming one of the drivers of how they drove their analysis of this company. To speak to, there's white space, they can grow their TAM, they can grow their market share. And as a result, there's a reason to put on a buy for this company. I'll speak through another case study. This is much more specific to what's going on in the world right now. Residential relocation analysis. It's funny, we are a myopic industry to some extent. And no criticism to anybody specifically, but just, hey, I think we all kind of know that, right? Within financial services, there's a tendency towards people of a certain demographic background, certain level of income, classism, whatever. No criticism, just reality. So when we started to look at these conversations, our research teams had a bias towards what they believed everyone was doing because it was what they were doing. Are people moving? How's that work? Well, rather than just saying, well, let's go look at the New York real estate market or San Francisco or other key urban centers, we looked at it and said, we want to know, are people actually moving? Are they leaving certain places and moving to others? Well, this is one of those things where that seems like a knowable thing, but at the same time, there wasn't a vendor with that specific answer. Since then, several vendors have come out with versions of this, but we wanted to do something at the time, right? So where are people moving to or from, given COVID and working from home trends? And can we quantify the urban versus rural move, right? And we wanted urban versus rural because that's where the different stores are, that's where the retail impact is. And for this particular piece of analysis, we were working with a REITs team that wanted to be able to speak about pricing of housing. So we started this by looking for a source. We ended up finding it in one of the most straightforward, kind of comically useful ways, but you had to keep thinking about the problem. When you move, you forward your mail. The USPS is part of the federal government, and a Freedom of Information Act will allow you to find that information. So we had to phrase the question appropriately. One of the problems with the Freedom of Information Act requests is if you don't ask it right, you get very funny responses. But we had to phrase the question right, bring that back, and then combine it with geospatial analysis using Carto's function, aggregate by zip code, move from zip code to other grouping pieces. If we want to look at demographic information, that's by census block, not by zip code, et cetera, et cetera. All these are solvable problems, especially within a geospatial tool like Carto's. But it was still a problem. But what we were able to then do with that is figure out where are people leaving and where are they going. So again, not crazy data. There's size to this, but not insane. But one of the key aspects around this was how are we going to present information on the whole country in a way that people can quickly understand, start to act on, and then drill in if they have a real question. So here's an example. Look at the whole country. These are areas where people were net outflowing, net leaving, and places where people were net going. So leaving New York, going to Florida. That's kind of in line with the kind of myopic view of a lot of people, but at the same time, here's information for that. Here's a grounded observation to give you that. And because we are looking at something with such a history, I wasn't just answering the question for, are people moving now, period. We are able to normalize it against normal behavior and see whether or not that was a difference than historical norms. So we have areas without a shedding, there wasn't an extreme difference, things like that. But then we have all the areas where you can see the dramatic shift, right? And how'd this fit? We were then able to explicitly look by impact to company where they own property, because I know their properties, I know where people are moving, and I can then tell you, are people leaving or coming into areas where this specific REIT has more exposure or less, as opposed to a general statement of people be leaving San Francisco. Instead, I can say the specific areas where these REITs have exposure over the whole country has more or less impact period over period. And we can see the variation on historical years versus this year. I know that's been a lot. I appreciate everyone's questions. I'm going to open it up. I do see a couple of questions have come into the chat, so sorry I haven't paid attention to this thus far, but I'm going to take a look up here and I'd be happy to answer them. Cool. Thank you, Anne-Marie. I do appreciate the comment, and yeah, it was an interesting aspect of being able to actually get them to change their model, our research team, by looking at the information instead of just saying, neat chart. It was impactful to the key thesis. That was kind of our big piece. Why don't you do analysis on CT or BG level? Why zip code level? Great question. It's one of those things about how's the data reported to us. So in that particular case, the data came into us from the feds, from the US Postal Service. They aggregated on a zip code level. And we had relatively small amounts of ability to get them to go more granular or shift around how they were doing it. We thought about breaking things up by taking a zip code and breaking into chunks based off known distributions, things like that. Didn't want to pursue that because that was just a giant layer of guessing on top of grounded known truth. But since we did this analysis, we found that there are other sources of information that can answer this on a more granular basis. I don't want to speak about any specific vendors on the open call, but I'm happy to provide that information to anybody if they want to reach out to me. We have found some people that know down to the house who has stopped living in that house and moved to other places. Not for everyone in the country, but for enough of a panel to be very actionable, and something that we do feel to be something that could be useful if someone was asking a more timely or granular version of this question. When we did this analysis, we are more asking the general statement of, is the trend different? But we've explored the idea that our clients would like to know it on a more granular basis, either for other types of investing, or if they're on the corporate side, to think about this on it from a perspective of where should they open their next store, or how should they expand their business, etc. Well, I know I've run a little bit long, but I'm happy to answer anything else. Are there any other questions? Anything else I can provide? I will flip to Jefferies disclaimers. Please read these in detail and know that they're all true.
Thank you very much, Rayne.
You're very welcome. As I said, if there are any questions, I'm very easy to find and I'm happy to answer them to anybody.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to walk through those use cases. It was definitely fascinating, and yeah, brilliant to have you on board.